I have been bombarded with requests to comment on America's new dietary guidelines, and that may be because we have made previous videos on dietary guidelines from the world's healthiest countries. We interviewed the scientific teams that created them. I think we're the only group that has done that. But in this case, I thought, I have my head in another video, and someone solid like Dr. Carvalho will cover it. And he did this morning, doing his usual solid job. But he went light on the one thing that has shocked the international community. I know this because I regularly talk to nutrition scientists from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Switzerland, France, Canada, Japan, the UK, Spain, Mexico, and I am sure I'm forgetting some. Their first response is, how can a country that stands alone among industrial nations in terms of obesity, consumption of prescription drugs, cost of healthcare, and life expectancy ignore the scientists from all the healthy countries? They do say that it's good that we stressed whole food, but they say, isn't that obvious to everyone? Their guidelines have been based on whole food for 50 years. A few of them acknowledge that avoiding processed food may not be that obvious to all Americans because, for example, Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman designed and promote perhaps the most ultra-processed food anyone can think of. Their second comment is it looks very much like these guidelines were purchased by the beef and dairy industries. The committee is filled with people like J. Thomas Brenna, who has been funded by the National Cattlemen's Beef and the Texas Beef Council, among many other conflicts. Or Don Layman, who complains that in his career he was never able to obtain funding from the NIH, so he took it from the Beef Board, the National Dairy Council, Kraft, Nestle, and many others. And so they put beef and dairy at the top of the pyramid. Does that look like any other dietary guideline from any healthy country? All the others minimize red meat except for Denmark, Switzerland, and Spain, who completely removed it from their guidelines. And those countries have two reasons for doing that. And the first is the best studies show that red meat is the most pro-aging food we can eat. Here is what a group of countries led by Norway published after studying millions of people across 7 countries. Even a modest increase in whole grains, legumes, and nuts extends life. An equally modest decrease in red meat consumption increased life expectancy almost as much, even more than decreasing sugar-sweetened beverages. And a group of universities from Canada, Denmark, Boston, and Chicago came up with a heat map of foods ranked by their effect on aging by following over 100,000 health professionals for more than 30 years. Foods in green slowed aging the most. Foods in red increased it the most. And way at the bottom, as the most pro-aging food of all, was meat. But the second reason is much bigger. If you're wondering why there are so many pro-meat and dairy people on this committee, it's because what they have to hide with regard to the environment is much bigger than what they have to hide with regard to nutrition. I have a decent background in environmental epidemiology, and have I ever seen this movie before? France banned lead in paint in 1909 because we knew back then it was toxic. But the American lead industry ran the tobacco playbook for decades before the tobacco industry invented it, including making coloring books for children to convince them that lead is great. The American lead industry managed to buy 70 more years of dumping lead into the environment, which you and your children are suffering from, because it got everywhere, including your protein powder. It's still falling from the sky over your house because they lobbied for a loophole for gasoline-powered airplanes. The most cited scientist in the world is Walter Willett, and he has a deep knowledge of both nutrition and the environmental impact of food. I was in his home last month, and we talked about it. He's 80 and still working hard.
I think as someone who's spent their career looking at the health picture, that I do have to say that the climate change, environmental issues, but especially climate change, which is so many of these processes are irreversible, this does concern me really actually more than the health issue. Environment, there's no going back.
Oh, I know, it's not reversible.
The impacts are huge. The red meat, the beef, is by far the highest in terms of environmental impact.
It's like a factor of 10.
Right.
for water use, land use.
There has to be limits to the tolerable amount of greenhouse gas emissions from the food system. Obviously, water limits and land use.
I mean, it's one thing with diet, oh, you're going to live 10 years less, you're going to have a heart attack or cancer or something like that. But there's some big stakes on the planetary stuff. People just cannot grasp how big that impact is. Like in California, we have 1.7 million dairy cows.
Right.
They emit 150 pounds per day of feces. And those feces are not processed at the same standard as human feces are in our wastewater. And so there's probably 1 million people in the Central Valley of California who have nitrate-tainted water. It's a disaster. Go drink the soy milk, for heaven's sakes. It's not an ideological thing. It's for your own good, for your own health. It's not the elites trying to control what you eat. It's
and for our grandchildren's future.
I mean, we're going to miss the Amazon when it's gone. And Amazon deforestation, it's going. It's primarily driven by beef.
Right.
I was just there last summer, and it's burning all, and they don't chop it down so that carbon goes back into no, they light a match to it.
Right.
Yikes, it appeared that I talked Walter's ear off in that interview, but I think when I publish the full interview, you'll see that Walter did most of the talking, and you can be notified if you subscribe and hit the bell. America is continually shocking the world by selling our environmental and energy policies to the oil companies. And now we've shocked the world by selling our dietary guidelines to the beef industry. I hate sounding cynical, but it's no threat to the beef and dairy industries to put all that fruit and vegetables on the pyramid. Americans don't eat enough of them to cut into beef and dairy revenue. And it gives the guidelines credibility because most people believe they are healthy. But whole grains and beans are a different story because they're cheaper for consumers to buy than meat, and they're filling, so they do cut into beef revenues. But they are far less profitable to grow, so does it surprise anyone that they're minimized in our guidelines? And I really don't like thinking this, but can anyone explain why we're canceling cancer and nutrition and aging research? Those 3 topics are extremely damaging to the beef industry, and they, along with the petroleum industry, are our overlords now.